Okay, and we're back really fast. You see, I just let you guys go, and I told you I would do this recording for you. And so I'm going to finish out chapter 13, and then we will, hopefully, we're going to have to get caught up somewhere. So maybe on the 28th and the 2nd, I can work Paul into one setting. That's all we can do. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here. Okay, let's see, we got to this. There we go. So number 3 would be the Greek ideas of human society was developed. Large cities brought poverty, which meant an audience for the gospel. Go ahead and pause it. Okay, we're back. So, well, what are we talking about here? Well, Greek culture emphasized cities. Now, that's not to say that Rome did not and other cultures did not, but most of the time it just happened. You know, Rome was not really a planned city. It just so happened that it was built near a river. People started gathering, and so you have a city. But Greek society actually built cities. Like in Alexandria in Egypt, they built a city and they made it a place. They put the infrastructure there to build these cities. Antioch, Ephesus, Corinth, all these cities were put together, and it was a Greek idea to put a bunch of people together. Okay, well, what this did was create problems, and some of the problems is poverty. And today in big cities, in Manila, in New York City, you have maybe a lot of rich folks, a lot of rich people, but you also have a lot of poor people. And when you're in the city, it's not like you can go and plant something or raise goats or cattle or pigs or whatever. You have to rely on other ways to make a living, to get fed. So remember, Jesus talked about who was his main audience. Well, Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor." Okay, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And that's the first line in Matthew chapter 5 that Jesus talks about. Okay? Let's see. Okay, pause. Okay. Uh, how do we start this? So, religion, syncretism. Okay, well, we already know what SYN means. Remember what synoptic meant? A seeing together. Well, syncretism, syncing, if you sync something, not that it goes down, but SYNC. Remember the singing group NSYNC? They all sang in sync. Not in a sink where you have water, but religious syncretism. A banding together of religions. And what this means is during this time, instead of having Roman gods, Greek gods, and pagan gods, they all kind of came together, and basically everybody just worshiped every god. Everybody just worship whatever you want. The Romans too, they had their own god system, but they actually took it and stole it from the Greeks. The Greeks had their own developed um, Greek god system, Zeus and Apollos and all that, and Rome just took it over and changed the name. Okay, so a whole banding together. And although they're all pagans, what we're talking about, pagans would be the category of others, such as more Eastern philosophy, the Zoroastrians and Phoenicians and things like that. They had their own god system. All right, so that was another thing too. I guess we need to mention that Greek imposed their god system on everyone else too. Okay, so it kind of made it a lot easier. Remember, in Ephesus, they worshiped Diana. Well, how did they know about Diana? Well, because of Greek culture. Okay, now we want to talk about, this is not in your book. I kind of pulled this out of some other material. This idea of fullness of time that we talked about in Galatians 4:4. Okay, I'll pause it here. You guys can copy it. Okay, we're back. So the fullness of time. Okay, Galatians 4:4. Well, one of the things was the Septuagint. Okay, I don't know how you would pronounce it there. Some people here pronounce it Septuagint, but the correct way is Septuagint. It's a Latin phrase. Okay, and the Roman numerals are LXX. 50 plus 10 plus 10 is 70. So you'll see in a lot of biblical writings, instead of spelling out Septuagint, they will just say LXX. Okay, the Old Testament into Greek. Okay, what this means, of course, we know the Old Testament was originally in Hebrew, and it was translated into Greek. Legend had it that 70 people translated it, and that's why we have the word Septuagint, which means 70. They estimate it was translated about 250 BC. There are many quotes in the New Testament are from the Septuagint. Mark 7 verses 6 through 7, Jesus quotes from the Septuagint. Now, how do we know that? Okay, well, how do you know it's not from Hebrew? If it's well, it's the way the word ordering, the Greek, you go from Hebrew to Greek, and then it's in Greek also. So Jesus quotes it nearly word for word in the Greek language. And so that's how we know, and biblical scholars know that the way Jesus phrased it and so forth, it would not be done in Hebrew. Okay, let's see, anything else about the Septuagint? Keep in mind that when this was translated, a lot of Hebrew scholars, probably in Jerusalem and so forth, thought this was blasphemy, right? That Hebrew was God's language, and you were supposed to learn this in that language, and by translating into another language, excuse me, you would not get the same translation. So these were Jews who translated it, are in Alexandria, and they're far away from Jerusalem, so they can do this. And as you get farther and farther away from Jerusalem, you're going to have Jews who are less Jewish. Okay, Priscilla and Aquila lived in Rome. They probably had some money. They were probably, quote, less Jewish than a Jew living in Jerusalem. Now, another interesting thing here is that this gives us an idea that God does approve of translations. Okay? If Jesus is quoting from the Septuagint, then that means that God did not mind that the Septuagint was translated from Hebrew into Greek, okay, because Jesus quotes from it directly. Now, he doesn't all the time. There are some instances where he doesn't, but a lot of the quotes are, and from the apostles as well. So we know they must have been familiar with the Septuagint, probably also with the Old Testament in Hebrew as well. Okay, pause. Okay, again, the fullness of time. Number 2, the diaspora. And you guys probably know this. This is just basically diaspora, meaning dispersing of the Jews. And these are just basically Jews living outside of Palestine. These Jews who live way off. There are Jews in Rome, Jews in Alexandria. Remember in Acts chapter 18, Apollos, he was from Alexandria. Galatians 2:5, Acts 2:5, this is where we see that every nation under heaven had come out to Jerusalem during the day of Pentecost. Number 3, many God-fearers. Well, what are we talking about? These are people, maybe mentioned, and we could reference them to God in Romans chapter 1. We could think about Cornelius, who, Cornelius chapter 10, verse 2 says, a devout man, a man who feared God within his own household, gave alms generously to the people, prayed to God always. But you see that in verse 2, in Acts chapter 10, verse 2, who feared God, who had a high respect for God, who believed in God. And this happened a lot during this era. Now think about this, okay, very interesting. So let's say you're a pagan Gentile and you live somewhere around Jerusalem or that area or whatever. And you hear about the Jews. Well, first of all, your gods. Let's think about your gods. So you worship Zeus, Diana, Athena, Aphrodite, all these gods, you know, that go on. These gods did not care about you. Okay, you hope to please them so that they would not torment you. Okay, there was not a personal relationship between these gods and people, and they were actually feared. I mean, you just hoped you just wouldn't have to deal with these gods because they would make your life miserable, because they were thought to meddle into your life and do all this and that. And so these gods that you worshiped, you didn't like them really. So you read about and you hear about this God of the Hebrews who saves them, who takes care of them, who intervenes on their behalf, who disciplines them when they do wrong, who gives them a set of laws that they follow. They make it illegal to kill each other. They make it illegal to treat other people bad. And the Gentiles, when they see this, like Cornelius, are jealous. They're very jealous of this religion of the Hebrews. Okay, so they say, well, we want to be a Hebrew. Well, guess what? You can't. You can be what's called a proselyte, where you can do everything up to the point of being a Jew that you can. But you can never be a pure Jew, because Jews are by bloodline. Okay? And plus, what kept a lot of Gentiles from being Jews is what I have here, because of circumcision. Okay? Gentiles would just about do anything they could to have that relationship with God, but they would not get circumcised. Okay? The Roman government and the Greek government, both, Greek cultures, Roman, looked down on the Jews because of this circumcision. There's many books and articles written about it. The Romans wrote about it, how disgusting it was to self-mutilate yourself. Okay? But we understand that in biblical terms as a covenant between Abraham and God and so forth. You know, a lot of cultures do it today because of health reasons. You know, not really anything else. I think in the United States, it's still a high percentage of babies. Here in the United States, they do it when they're babies, when they're very young. In Europe, it's not done that much, as much. But circumcision is what kept a lot of Gentiles from becoming more Jewish. Because you see, the older you get, the older you are and you get circumcised, you can actually die from blood loss. So it's better to have it done when you're young. Well, when you're young, you don't think about stuff like that unless you're a Jew. If you're a Jew, you do it on the 8th day. Okay, well, let's move on. So number 4, many were upset because of the corruption of the Jewish leaders. And you can see that. Remember, Jesus told them about that. Jesus called them a brood of vipers. John the Baptist, John the Baptizer called them a brood of vipers. Jesus accused them of taking the widows' houses. And so there was not a great respect for the leadership there in Jerusalem, the priestly and the religious leaders and so forth. Jesus didn't care. He just called them hypocrites and move on, right? Okay, write this down. Okay, good. Another thing too about the fullness of time is the number of Jews. Okay, at this particular point in history, there are more Jews in the whole world than at ever any other time in the world. Okay, did I phrase that right? Did that make sense? So at this particular, when Jesus comes on the scene, when he's there are more Jews living than had ever lived before in the history of the world. Okay? Well, you say, well, what about Noah? Well, they weren't Jews. Okay, we're talking about Jews, the Jewish people. Also, we know that there were many, many, many synagogues, synagogues in Greek. There's that word syn, together. Okay, this literally means a coming together. Places they would meet, they would come together and meet as synagogues, where they would perform worship service, everything but animal sacrifices and so forth. And these are strung out through all over the empire. Okay, and I already asked the question, you guys knew that synagogues started after the Babylonian captivity. Okay, the temple was destroyed. They didn't have a place to worship. Some would say it actually started in Babylon. But anyway, so there are a lot of synagogues for Jesus and the apostles to go into and preach. Okay, pause it. Okay. Religions and philosophies. Religions and philosophies. Number 1, Alexander the Great opened up Greek religion in this area. Of course, we know that as Alexander conquered this area back in 323, 333 BC, that he spread the Greek language, he built cities, he spread business contacts, he spread the God system, and of course he also spread the Greek language and all this. So he opened up this idea, different religions in this area. But, interesting enough, by the time of the New Testament, many of these ideas were in decline. Okay, there wasn't as much of this, and the Roman Empire had a lot to do with it. Because, these Greek areas, they were worshiping these Greek gods, and then the Romans come in and take over, and they're like, well, we like their gods better because they're stronger. Okay, and I did put down an exception here in Acts chapter 14, verse 12, where you remember, let's see, what did I do? 14:12. This is where they accused them Paul and Barnabas of being Zeus and Hermes. Zeus, and in the Roman god system would be Mercury. In the Greek, Hermes. Okay, this is a guy who could run fast. But overall, these ideas of worshiping many gods were in decline. Now think about the Jews. All right, so what was the main problem with the Jews during the Babylonian and the Syrian captivity? They were worshiping idols. But by the time the new century comes around, the New Testament comes around, the Jews have realized their God is superior to all their other things. And you don't have a problem with the Jews worshiping other gods, idolatry. But you still see it in other places. Okay, write this down. Okay, we're back. I'd mentioned in class earlier that this is not my favorite part to go over unless you're really interested in philosophy, which I'm not, except when I know it's going to impact the study of the New Testament in some way. So what I've done here is I've kind of went away from the book. The book really doesn't do a good explanation of this. You see on page 185 a couple of stone faces there of Zeno and stuff. So I've kind of broken these down to 4 major schools that we'll need to know for the test. The number one is called the academics, and this would be the philosopher Plato. And this is important. I mean, okay, so you think about, well, Sir Jeremy, why are you telling us this stuff? And I guess the point is to understand how Christianity would have been accepted by the Gentiles. Because this is what they know, what we're about to study. This is what they know nothing about God. They might have heard something about a Jewish God over there, but their gods are here, and their philosophy is here. And that's all they have to work with. And so, you know, maybe that's a good lesson for us. We gotta remember that when we spread the gospel, that whoever we're teaching, even if it's in a denomination, that's all they know. They don't know about the church of the Bible. They don't know about Jesus said he would build one church. They don't know that in Romans 16:16, Paul actually designates his people as the churches of Christ. Okay, so they don't know that, so we got to teach them, right? Okay, so here's some, what are the academics? Well, you know, there's books written on this, but I've just made it real simple. Denies knowledge. One cannot really know. And so the idea is by knowing, you really can't know. And that's how you know. Okay? I don't know if it makes any sense, but coming from a point of ignorance and not understanding allows you to open your mind to more knowledge. And that's basically what this is. Many of Plato's thoughts were put into other philosophies, mainly because he was the first one to really come up with these different ones. Plato's student was Aristotle, so Aristotle used a lot of his stuff. Okay, pause it. Okay, oh, look at this word here, peripatetics. Peripatetics. All right, well, what do we know about this word? Well, this is an area. It's basically an area, actual physical place in Greece, where probably in Athens, where there are a lot of columns, and these philosophers like Aristotle used to sit around these areas, and they would sit around and talk about philosophy. The word peripatetics in Greek is actually could be coming from the word which means walking, walking around. Okay, peripatetics, they say, could also actually more mean walking around. Well, what do they believe? Well, the world is substance. Okay. Well, what does that mean? Well, I don't really, I mean, it's just a long thing to go over. But just know this, okay? World of substance. Peripatetics has a world of substance. The world is made up of things, okay? Now, some will say, well, Aristotle had some idea of the atomic structure and elements of things. Well, maybe. You know, he knew you could get iron from the ground and make a sword. Okay, so things were based on substance. Knowledge depends on experience. Okay, what you know is probably dependent on the past and what you experienced. Aristotle strongly believed in the Greek culture, and by the way, Aristotle was Alexander the Great's tutor, his teacher. Okay, so we see here, Aristotle strongly believed in Greek culture. Well, Alexander the Great also believed in the Greek culture. Okay, number 3, the Stoics. And it was started by a guy named Zeno. Okay, well, what do these Stoics do? Well, first of all, they're materialistic, which would mean they believe the acquisition of material things is what made you great. Now, that doesn't mean they would go out and steal it, because look at number 2, doing what is right leads to virtue, which was a very important concept. So, being morally right leads to virtue. Try to stop passions. Okay, so you get angry, you have to control it. You lust for someone, you need to control it. Heavily influenced heavily in Roman idea. The Romans loved this idea of the Stoics, of Stoicism. And so they incorporated a lot of this idea in the Roman army of doing what's right. Well, you think about, well, the Romans killed Jesus. Well, yeah, but they thought Jesus was a criminal. Okay, he was falsely accused by the Jews and so forth. And I'm not defending the Romans. What they did was a sin, but remember, they were to keep the peace. Remember, there were 2 criminals that were hung up right beside Jesus. Okay, were they guilty or not? Well, probably they were guilty because it says they were criminals. Okay, so the Romans did some good and some bad, right? A lot of countries like Britain, they asked the Roman government to come and take over their country because they wanted this stability. They wanted a stable government. Okay, so there's the Stoics. Epicureanism, this is the guy's name, Epicurean. And this was a interesting philosophy. It was mainly just do whatever you want to. Love pleasure. Indulge in pleasure. Oh, I think I'm supposed to pause. Did you guys pause? Okay, well, we move on. We're back. Pleasure is freedom from pain, was basically their model. Okay? Romans did not like this philosophy. You know, obviously this runs against this idea of Stoics, doesn't it? Doing what's right, stop your passions. But no, Epicureanism says indulge in your passions. You have passions, well, go ahead and do them. Okay, there's no restrictions. This is almost going to be we would call it precursor, or something that's developing that may later turn into Gnosticism. Okay, this idea that the spirit is different from the body, and you can engage your body into physical lust without sinning because that's your body and not your spirit. Okay, which we know is false. Okay, pause. Good deal, we're back. So now we move into how Christians saw themselves. Okay, this is coming from the book. Christians saw themselves as inheritors of the promise from the Old Testament. Okay, no one would argue with that. The Jews did not. Remember, Paul has to tell them in Romans, first couple of chapters, about the Jews. Okay, and about the pagans. You know, first Paul really jumps into the pagans. And the Jews are like, yeah, you get them, Paul. You talk about those pagan Gentiles that sin. Well, and then in 4, 5, and 6, Paul goes in and he really gets into the Jews. Saying, you're not justified just because you're a Jew. You're justified because of God. You're justified, it wasn't because Adam did circumcision that he became a Jew. It's because of his faith. Okay? Okay, so the Christians, as we should, I think, see ourselves as the inheritors of the promise. The Jews also, if they accept it, right? If you accept Christ. Okay, and number 2, the gospel was centered around Christ. Okay, well, obviously. Okay, so I put this up here, and let me see, what page is this on? I want you to go over this and know this for the test. This kind of gives you a more in-depth study of what early Christians believed they had in common with the Jews. God created heaven and earth. God chose the patriarchs of Israel and so forth. Okay, these are some common things, and this will be test material. Okay, so be sure you know this. If you don't want to copy it down, then go and make a copy on the copying machine or something. Or if you want me to send you this copy, I can, so you don't have to write it. But you can probably copy it down. It won't take long. And by writing, you actually learn it. So good deal. Okay. Pause and write this down. This is a summary of the chart I just showed you here. But it kind of just breaks it down, and it kind of tells you the differences. So similar, again, Christians and Jews believed in the Old Testament. Christians and Jews believed in one God. The Jews would actually claim that that there was no plan in Jesus Christ, and this man, Jesus of Nazareth, he wasn't the Son of God. He wasn't divine. He didn't do anything special. He didn't rise from the dead. That wasn't him. So here's the difference, the role of Jesus Christ in God's plan. It's interesting, the Jews can't really, when you ask them, well, who is the Messiah talking about in the Old Testament? And they kind of won't tell you because a lot of them do not even believe in the Old Testament anymore. They look at Judaism as a culture, and they don't take the Old Testament as literal meaning. Okay? All right, and of course, number 2, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I think, yes, that is it. Okay, so we'll take a long extended pause here until Thursday morning. And this is Jeremy signing off.